All right, and let's get started. You should be able to see my presentation right now. So welcome to the Getting Credit and Recognition for Method Development webinar from Protocols.io. I'm Lenny Teytelman. I'm one of the co-founders of Protocols.io, having started it over 10 years ago. We launched in 2014. So before we dive into the webinar, just a few items of housekeeping. So first of all, yes, we are recording this. You should have notice of that. We just started the recording. You'll be getting a recording. You will also get a link to the slides that I'm showing. So if there is any URL or some information, you don't need to furiously scribble it. Today, tomorrow, you should get an email. Everyone who registered for the webinar will get an email with the recording and the slide link. And there will be, so we'll go about 30 minutes or so in terms of the presentation, and then we'll have 10-15 minutes for Q&A. This is a webinar, so you can put your questions into the Q&A, or you can type them directly into the chat. I don't think we have more than 50 people, so that should be manageable either way. And heads up that every month we do different webinars. This is not, if you are new to Protocols.io, this is not an introductory webinar for the functionality of the platform itself. This is a presentation that will be more geared towards academic users. So if you're in a pharmaceutical or biotech, you probably have publishing disabled by your administrators and organization, and you're probably interested in some of the other webinars that we offer, like the intro and advanced. So you can take a look at the link on protocols.io/webinars for the regularly scheduled webinars. If you urgently need answers to something about functionality, the link here lets you request a one-on-one demo at a time convenient for you. You don't have to wait for the next intro or advanced webinar. And also, if you don't want to wait for a webinar or the next ones are happening at a time that's inconvenient for you, we also have links to previously recorded versions of intro advanced webinars. So you are able to view that as well. All right, and with that, let's get into the agenda. As I said, we'll go for about 30 minutes or so, and then have plenty of time for Q&A. And of course, you can enter your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. You can enter them as we go along. One item I forgot to indicate here. One item, if you need assistance in terms of transcription of this, in terms of accessibility, this is being transcribed, so you should be able to turn on closed captioning if you need it in the Zoom panel at the bottom of the screen. So that should be enabled if you need it. You should be able to turn it on. All right, and let's get started. And a recording of there's another question in terms of whether this will be made available in the webinars link. I think there is an older version of this by my colleague, who is the head of outreach, also scientist, Dr. Gabriel Gasquet. He's unable to do today's because he's doing a workshop on Protocols.io in Mexico at the moment. But there is a version recorded by him, and we cover similar materials. So we'll have the video of this. You'll be able to share that, and there is already on the webinars page a version of what I will be presenting in the previously recorded. And in terms of the agenda, again, this is more focused on the academic researcher, even though both academic and biopharma researchers use Protocols.io, but this one is really geared towards the academic user, and that's why it's getting credit and recognition. If you're biotech, you're likely just using Protocols.io for internal organization and internal reproducibility. Right. So we'll talk about just in general, what do we mean by credit and research beyond the paper, and then give a little bit of background and what has changed in the efforts to give people credit and recognition for the hard work that goes into method development. And then we'll dive into specifically how you can use Protocols.io, what are the different options for sharing on Protocols.io and increasing the visibility, and also connected to publishing papers and peer-reviewed aspect of both for protocols specifically as part of method sections or standalone protocol articles. And then we'll get into the Q&A. So typically, if we're in academia, we think of credit and research as the research paper that we publish. But over the last 20, 30 years, there's been sort of an increasing push to make sure that it's not just the paper. So there are lots of different research outputs, which the paper in the center here sort of ties together. But of course, the work that goes in and generates the results and the discussions that go into the paper, there are a lot of experiments. There's a lot of detailed know-how in the methods. If there's any computational aspect, there is code that is written that does not go line by line as software description into the research paper that is published. Data sets, I think maybe in the 90s and the 80s, we would include DNA sequences directly in research papers. That's no longer the case. We now have best practices for sharing data. But in general, there's been an increasing push to make sure that people get credit not just for the paper that is published, but if you share the code or data, and more recently, similarly with methods, if you share methods and all of these other research outputs that people are using, paper remains an important part of an academic publishing journey and sharing journey, but it's not the only part. And funders, publishers, universities are paying more and more attention to making sure that all of the different outputs that go into generating research papers are shared in appropriate places. We'll talk more about that in the next parts of this presentation. But that's definitely been sort of a movement towards that. And if we zero in on method development particularly, it is sort of going through an explosion in terms of the places where you can get credit and where you can share. And it is something quite new for method sharing in particular. So if we go back just 20 years, so 2 decades back, Nature Methods, which is now pretty well-known established journals, but Nature Methods was launched only 20 years ago. And you can see here in the 2004 announcement of a new journal from the Nature portfolio, as Nature Methods was being launched, there was an article accompanying the launch, which included this paragraph saying that the goal is to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods. And they wrote, because we believe that major methodological developments often take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast, the method sections of specialized journals, although extremely useful for the targeted peer groups, do not grant technical information, the wide exposure conducive to interdisciplinary exchanges. This journal rather addresses the broad audience of researchers working in the life sciences. So general journal focused on techniques rather than a specific research topic or question. So it's not in a journal of immunology that you're sharing a research paper, but you're specifically sharing a method. And what is interesting about this launch is that within Nature, when we talk to the founding editor, Dr. Veronique Kiemer, when we talked to her about the launch of Nature Methods, there was actually some pushback within Nature and skepticism whether this would in fact be something that researchers want to share. And there was this feeling that what matters is the research result, and this journal won't take off, people won't submit because methods are supplementary. It's something you just get in touch with the lab for if you're reading a research article, and then ask for the particular protocol. And of course, 20 years later, this is one of the most important journals, most visible and highly cited in the Nature portfolio. And it's a resounding success. Even more so, not just Nature Methods, but I think 2 years after Nature Methods was launched, there was a recognition that, in fact, there is appetite in the research community for even more, and it's important not just to have a single journal, but Nature itself launched in 2006 Nature Protocols. And within the last, so that's 2004 for Nature Methods, 2006 for Nature Protocols. And within the last 10, 15 years, you see a proliferation. So after Nature Methods, most of the things that you see here are avenues for sharing protocols and methods that have been started in the last 15 years. Jove and Cold Spring Harbor protocols are around the same age as Nature Methods. We launched, as I said, Protocols.io in 2014, not as a journal, but as a platform that makes it even easier to share your protocols. But you can see that the appetite and the need for places to share research protocols goes far beyond Nature Methods. And the skeptics clearly have been proven wrong. And you can see on the slide that there's really been, over the last 20 years, an explosion in new avenues for sharing protocols and getting credit for that sharing. And on the Protocols.io side, so now we're going to be focusing specifically on methods. On the Protocols.io side, I really like this slide from one of our colleagues, Dr. Emma Ganley, who joined Protocols.io 4 years ago. And this is from an article about common mistakes in making cookies. And if you substitute making cookies for doing experiments, if the cookies are the result of your work, but it's the recipe that is the protocol, you can see that these are different outcomes of following basically the same similar recipe for chocolate chip cookies, but depending on how you shape them, whether it's on the lower or upper level of the oven, depending on whether you use baking powder or baking soda, you can get dramatically different results. And if all you're sharing is the cookie itself, which is the research results in the paper, without the details of what went into the recipe, what was in the protocol, it's going to be very hard for someone else to fix it, to get it to work in their hands, and to get the cookie that you want, which would be looking closer to this than the adjacent one here, right? So the same things that apply in the kitchen for the importance of the details in the recipes carry over 100% into the protocol space. So we launched Protocols.io in 2014 specifically to make it easier to share method details. This is our mission of Protocols.io, to share method details when you're doing the work with your colleagues, collaborators, co-authors, and then to make it easier to publish and get credit for your work, and importantly, to have a place where you can continue optimizing and sharing corrections and optimizations of the work. And my personal, I said I was co-founder of Protocols.io. My personal journey to it was that I spent a year and a half of my postdoc fixing just one step of the particular technique, microscopy technique that I was using. Took me a year and a half to learn that instead of a microliter of a particular chemical, we needed 5 microliters instead of 1, instead of 15-minute with that chemical incubation, we needed an hour. And after that year and a half, the realization was that this is not a new technique. I can't update the paper from the researcher who developed the technique several years before. And that means that I don't get any credit. Going to the theme of our credit webinar, I don't get any credit for that work. And everyone else who's using that specific protocol is getting completely misleading single cell results and has to spend another year or two rediscovering that slight change in just one step of the protocol. So that's sort of what led to this focus and desire to create a central place and make it easy to get credit for our method development and to make sure that we can easily share those updates. So today, 10 years after launch, this is a snapshot of where we are with Protocols.io. And just being transparent, our business model is if you're sharing publicly, it's open access, free to read and free to publish. So you can see that there are over 19,000 publicly shared protocols at this point. And every protocol, though, starts out privately. And if you're using Protocols.io, not for the public sharing, but for private collaboration, that's the part that we charge for. And that's the sustainability model for Protocols.io. But for this webinar, we'll be focusing on this public space. Apologies. And what you'll notice is that even though there is something like 160,000 researchers that have created dedicated accounts, have signed into Protocols.io and are using it to create and share protocols also privately, you will notice that these 19,000 public protocols, they draw over 1 million people to Protocols.io. As I said, these are open access. You don't have to sign in. You don't have to create an account if you want to access these 19,000 public protocols. So it is an open access repository. So that's the two sides: a private collaborative tool that we charge for, and an open access repository of protocols. And the reason I highlight this is that if you're sharing on Protocols.io, I want you to keep in mind that it's not just for the 160,000 researchers that have created accounts, but it is for the 1 million plus scientists and researchers that are visiting Protocols.io every year. So there is quite a lot of visibility if you're sharing on Protocols.io. Speaking of those 19,000 protocols, you can search the entire public repository of Protocols.io easily, even though most people do Google searches and land on, I think 60% of our traffic comes from Google Scholar and just Google itself with researchers looking for a particular technique. But of course, on Protocols.io, you can do a search. If you get similar techniques, we try to share all of the information that we have, all of the metrics around the use and engagement with the protocol. So if you have in this search on the screenshot, I think you probably can't see it, but it says there's 800 results for PCR, you are going to be looking for one or two specific protocols, but we'll let you choose when there are related techniques. We'll let you explore how many of them have been used, reused, cited in other articles. And everything on protocols.io is sort of a template. So anything you see in the public repository, you can use it, not just download and print it out, but if you sign into protocols.io, you can make your own copy of it. You can edit. And then if you're if you've put significant effort into getting something from grasshoppers to work in crickets, you can actually share what we call a fork, a branch of a protocol that you took from someone else, and you can easily publish it. We try to give credit to both the original authors and the person sharing the fork, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But if you're sharing things publicly and you want them to come up and be discoverable on Google, and you want them to come up in search results more towards the top, there is a protocol that we've put together, sort of meta protocol, on how to get credit and make your protocols more discoverable and reproducible. So you can see that here. Again, we'll be sharing the link to these slides. Please explore the suggestions and tips that we give in there for how to make sure that if you're sharing your work publicly on protocols.io, that people doing the searches on Google or on protocols.io can find your work. So this is not I don't have time to dive into those specific suggestions, but follow this link and you'll see the tips. So if you are sharing publicly, don't assume that just because you've clicked publish, people can find it. You do want to put in a little bit of time to make sure that your protocol is actually discoverable. Right? And one of the beautiful examples that I love of what happens when you are sharing on protocols.io is illustrated in this example. So on Twitter, a researcher is asking, does anyone have an example of a protocol for doing something very specific in cortical neuron cultures? Another scientist, a postdoc at UCSF, replies, oh, there's five versions, 5 different similar techniques on protocols.io, and this is the one that you need. And what I love about this example, is if you look at where this protocol was shared, it's actually in the method section of this paper in the journal GigaScience. And the thing I love about it is that the protocol itself is in a paper on parasites of stickleback fish. The research paper has nothing to do with the original question, which is primary cortical neuron cultures, right? But the protocol, because it was shared in this paper, specifically in a repository in protocols.io, as opposed to just a description in the method section or supplementary file, the protocol is much more widely discoverable, and that's the increased discoverability. The chance that this scientist is looking at this research paper is close to 0 because they're not in this field. But by sharing a link to the detailed protocol, not only did the authors make this paper more rigorous and reliable, more reproducible, but they're allowing this sort of off-the-shelf use of their protocol beyond the particular organism that is the target of their research. So you can increase reproducibility, but by sharing in a repository, your protocol is more discoverable, and so you will have more attention to your method and you're impacting more people than just specifically in the field where you're studying. And I love this quote from a professor at the University of Adelaide, who has been sharing quite actively on Protocols.io. And he said 80% of my recent collaborations have been a direct result of sharing our protocols publicly on Protocols.io. So doing this, right, sharing the detailed protocols in a repository, because they are available on Google, because they're not just sitting directly on a paper, it gives you credit. It brings awareness to the work that you've done and can lead to collaborations and partnerships with others who are also using that particular technique, but maybe are not experts in it. And this is enabling reuse this way, and having collaborations. These are not specifically peer-reviewed papers, but I would say that frequently you take a method, it happens all the time. I spent 10 years at the bench as a student, a postdoc, and it is such a common experience that you take something that should work quickly, but you spend extra weeks or months. In my case, it was a year and a half, but you spend weeks or months trying to get something to work with your equipment, trying to get something to work in a slightly different cell line, organism. Maybe it's the same lizards, but you're starting them in different deserts, and the field work details for how to catch them slightly different, and it might take you several months for figuring out how to get something to work that what was true in Montana but is not true in California. And as we spend the time on that method development on Protocols.io, it's really quick to share. We did talk about the explosion. We'll talk more about the peer-reviewed aspects, and how can you turn your protocols into peer-reviewed publications. But just the act of taking a protocol, spending 20 minutes on Protocols.io to enter it, look over it, make sure that you follow the best practices for making it discoverable, and then clicking publish, it increases the visibility and hopefully is rewarding, and there's intrinsic benefit, right, in taking those 40 minutes for sharing the work, because hopefully it gives you recognition for that time. It may just be a sentence or two in the method section of the paper that you're publishing where you say, we did this, but behind that paragraph or a couple of sentences in the method section could be a year or months of work, and we want to make sure that other people don't have to waste the time, and that you get the credit and recognition for the time that it took. So on Protocols.io, the sharing is very straightforward. We don't peer review. It's not a journal. It's not going to get rejected. It takes time to enter your protocol and make it discoverable. You do need to put in a little bit of effort, but once you click publish, it's almost instantaneous that the protocol becomes available and discoverable. But frequently, we see that scientists want to go above and beyond. If you really have spent a significant amount of time getting something to work, you might want to go a little bit beyond just sharing on Protocols.io and actually turn your protocol into peer-reviewed paper. So let's talk about the publishing side. If you're making a protocol public, when you click publish, you will see that you have a short workflow. This is about 5 minutes to fill out your acknowledgements, authors and funders who are the colleagues on it, and It's a very quick publishing workflow. One thing to keep in mind is that you have two options on the publish side. So if you click publish on your protocol, any private protocol, you'll have the publish button unless publishing has been disabled because you're at a company or a similar organization. Most of you will see the publish button, and next to it will be reserve DOI. If you click publish or reserve DOI, you're basically going through the same workflow and making your work public. The difference is publish will make it public right away as soon as we've screened it and made sure that it's not spam or pseudoscience. It will go live and will be in Google and other places. If you are not quite ready to make it fully public, you can click reserve DOI, and then as in the example here, you'll get a DOI that you can use for publishing the protocol, including it in a research paper in the method section, or sending it for peer review in one of those method journals that we showed in the beginning. And it will only be available for the editor and reviewers in that case. If you say reserve DOI, they will be able to access it, but it won't be fully live and discoverable on Google or on a search on Protocols.io. So you can generate a DOI, use it for editors and reviewers, and then when your paper comes out, or if you feel it's been accepted and you're ready to make it fully public, then you can come back and just finish that one remaining step of making it fully public. There is a citation to the protocol. You'll see it on every public protocol in the metadata, your own or somebody else's. In the metadata tab on the protocol, you'll see the way to cite. And if a protocol accompanies a research paper and is part of that work, we will also ask you, you'll see below that the citation for the manuscript itself. And so we would be asking you to cite both the protocol and the research paper. And I think there is a good example of that here. I should also say one of the ways we try to make it easier to share a lot of protocols as part of publishing research papers is we have collections on Protocols.io. I won't go into the hands-on demonstration of how to do it, but there is a help article on this. You can reach out to us for the one-on-one demos, like I said in the beginning. But you'll see that instead of sharing one by one protocols, you could organize buffers, sample preparation, computational analysis. You could organize 10 different protocols that are part of a single paper together in a collection, get a single DOI citation link for the collection. And here's an example of a PLOS biology paper where if you look at the method section, you'll see that it says the detailed methods and protocols for the fruit fly work are available as a collection on Protocols.io. And that DOI, that link, if you come to it, will open and make visible all of the protocols that are accompanying that collection, that research paper. So that's a small thing that makes it easy. Going back to Lenny's personal story of how do we keep protocols up to date. If you have a correction or optimization, or you just want to clarify it, everything on Protocols.io is versionable. So if you want early credit, if you feel like this is close enough, it works, maybe it's not perfect, but this protocol works, you can share it without waiting an extra year or two to perfect it, because you can always come back to Protocols.io and click new version, clarify something, improve the language, share ways to make it more efficient, And both the original version and the newer one will continue to be available on Protocols.io. When someone lands on an earlier version of your protocol, they'll get a pop-up saying you can either view the earlier version or navigate to the newer one. And they will have their own separate DOI, so you can cite the specific version that you're using at the moment. Right? The example that I showed previously highlights a protocol that is part of a research paper, a collection of protocols that are part of a research paper. But going back to the idea of peer reviewing protocols specifically, if you remember in the beginning, I showed lots of different journals that now focus on peer reviewing and publishing methods, just like Nature Methods and Nature Protocols. And we try to make it easier. We've partnered with several such journals where you can send a protocol from Protocols.io for peer review, turn it into a paper, add introduction. And the expectation of the journals is not that you have groundbreaking new discoveries and data to present, but that you've gotten a technique to work that maybe it would take months for someone else, like we're saying, to transfer from an existing protocol to the application that they're struggling with. So this is an example from PLOS ONE. The PLOS ONE journal has started a specific channel article type called Lab Protocols, which is geared towards exactly that. So not a research paper, but a research method that you're trying to peer review and turn into a peer-reviewed publication. So it starts in this case, and this is not actually a life science method. This is an anthropology, and I think this was shared early, one of the first peer-reviewed protocols to appear in PLOS ONE through this partnership. But you can see that the paper on PLOS ONE links to the protocol with a click of a button. From the protocol on Protocols.io, we show you the citation and link right back to the article. And the really nice thing is you get a peer-reviewed protocol publication, paper publication through this. And yet you have all of the benefits of Protocols.io in terms of the dynamic and interactive way of using the protocol. Other people can, as we say, fork, run, build on your technique and reuse it. And even though you can't easily change or share optimizations on the paper itself because it is static in the journal as it should be, you can come back to Protocols.io, create a new version, just like we saw on the previous slide, and people that are looking at the paper and click on the protocol would be guided to the most recent version. These are some of the quotes from the researchers that have started on Protocols.io and then published a peer-reviewed version. These are the papers that they publish. I think there's over 100 papers since we started this publishing partnership with PLOS ONE not long ago. But in the example of these three, you can see here's a professor saying, I'm from a small country in Latin America. This made me famous in my country. That was a coronavirus related protocol. This is the protocol I showed on the previous slide from Dr. Cerasoni, who shared an anthropology protocol. And he was really excited about it because it's a first peer-reviewed paper in his graduate career. This is a group leader in Germany who said this is a first paper as a senior author from his research team. And it makes sense that you're able to publish if you've spent significant amount of time getting a technique to work. You should get credit for it. And it makes sense that you're able to turn it into a peer-reviewed paper before a regular research article because first you spent a year getting the technique to work. Now you're collecting data. Now you're doing the actual research, but there is no reason why that year of work shouldn't give you credit and recognition. The examples that I used here are specifically for Plus One. Since we started the publishing partnership with Plus One, other journals have joined this flow from Protocols.io to having your protocol peer reviewed. So Nature Protocols is now in the dropdown, Lab Animals, BMC Methods. So there are other journals that now welcome and are excited to see submissions of your protocols from Protocols.io. Obviously, I should emphasize, if you just have a slight 1 degree optimization of an incubation step or a simple buffer that you found on Google and you just put into Protocols.io, that's not something you would, if you didn't spend significant amount of time making changes to a technique, you would not be submitting it as a paper, and there wouldn't be expectation that it would be published and peer-reviewed. But there are many examples where existing methods need tweaks and optimizations and significant effort to get them to work. So this
hindsight.
Sorry. This is a different video. When you share protocols through these channels with the journals, we also have, in terms of the recognition, we also have what we call a spotlight program where we interview frequently the authors of these peer-reviewed protocols about their experience, about the trial and error of getting the protocol to work and the story behind the paper. So they're like 15-minute, they're not podcasts, they're video interviews, but you could also just listen to them. So regardless of which journal you publish in, we try to give you more credit and more visibility by doing these interviews that we call spotlights. And I do want to make sure that we have time for Q&A, so I will be wrapping up. I think I see already some questions in the Q&A in the chat. And Q&A, but I did want to bring it sort of full circle. The Nature Methods journal that was launched in 2004, and then Nature Protocols and Protocol Exchange, though those were efforts by Nature to improve method sharing. And I wanted to mention that Protocols.io, even though we started as a startup when we launched in 2014, we were actually acquired by Springer Nature in July of last year. So it fits with that direction of Springer Nature to be a leader in protocol sharing and that credit and recognition for the method development work. But having said that, and there are a lot of benefits for that acquisition, we're getting more resources as Protocols.io as part of it. We have more engineers, we have more content, much more adoption. So it's been very good for the community, I think, in terms of bringing stability to a precarious startup, giving us more resources and ensuring better growth. But I do want to say specifically that we are not a Springer Nature platform specifically. We do remain a general repository for protocols, and we do work with many different publishers. There are many funders that recommend or require Protocols.io. And you can see here there are many journals. The publisher Wiley has recently added Protocols.io to author guidelines, recommending sharing on Protocols.io in all of their journals. So there are probably not just 500 plus, but probably more than 1,000 journals at this point from many different publishers that encourage use of protocols.io. So we remain a repository, general repository. It's not just if you're publishing and using Springer Nature journals. I am going to be stopping here. Just again, examples in the slides of how to cite the papers that you do get citations. I already mentioned that we try to expose everything we know about the use and adoption of a protocol, so that people know what they can trust, which of the 10 different versions of a particular protocol they should get started with. So every public protocol in protocols.io has a metrics tab where we share everything we know about how many people are using it, citing it. If it's been mentioned in a paper, we try to catch that and add that those citations to those mentions to the metrics tab. And the versioning, as you make changes, as you fork, as you make versions of a protocol, on the forks tab, we show what is the evolution of that protocol. So that goes back to that credit. I said if someone makes a fork of a protocol, we try to capture what was forked, who made the original protocol, who made the fork, so that people get credit for both the original and the fork. And I won't go through this, but just to mention that traditionally, before protocols.io, if we go back in 20 years, traditionally, you either try to squeeze everything into a method section, which is inadequate, or you would put in a supplementary file. And there's been, this is an article in The Scientist from 2019. There's a concerted push towards moving away from supplementary files and using for your data, using something like Figshare, Zenodo, or an organism-specific repository for your data, putting code on GitHub, and putting protocols in a repository like protocols.io. They're much better, these are much better best practices than supplementary files. So again, we'll share the slides. You can read more about why we recommend this, but I will stop there and take questions. So we're now in the Q&A part. I think there are already some in the Q&A in chat, but feel free to put your questions in, or if you'd like to, we can also unmute and let you ask a question. So either you can raise your hand if you'd like to just ask a question, or you can put it into Q&A or chat. One question that I already have from Siddiq is, when citing a protocol from protocols.io, in my paper, is that considered acceptable since protocols.io is not peer-reviewed? Great question. The best practice is indeed to cite in the reference section, not just only in the method section, putting a link directly, but to use a full citation. So that is what the publishers and journals prefer. That is what we recommend. And in a way, you can think of a protocol you shared on protocols.io like a method preprint. And if you think of bioRxiv, if you think of preprints in general, it is accepted that they get cited even if they're not peer-reviewed yet, and people can see there is awareness in the research community to what is cited in a journal and what is cited as part of being shared as a data set on Figshare or as a preprint on bioRxiv. So I haven't seen examples of journals that push back on a citation, even though it's not peer-reviewed. So good question. And let's see if we have anything. I'll stop the sharing. Let's see if we have anything in the Q&A. All right, and in case anyone is shy in terms of asking questions in a recorded event, we are going to stop recording now.